So today's topic is guns. I'm going to talk about my opinion on gun laws. I could talk about law, but that's a whole different subject in itself. So I'll talk about gun laws a little bit and my personal feelings about guns and so forth. So I grew up around guns. So ever since I was a little toddler crawling around on the carpet, there was guns in the house, and we had two shotguns, I believe. We had four or five different pistols. We had like a 45 ACP. We had like a Browning. We had like a Czechoslovakian pistol. We had a German Luger. We had a 9mm Browning, I think, which was the one that started World War I or World War II, one of them wars, one of them types of guns and all that. And then later on in life, I got experience with the fully automatic and semi-automatic guns and M16s and AK-47s and different guns and HKs and different guns and all that. So I kind of been around guns a good part of my life. Currently, I don't have a gun, so um, I live in Japan right now, so it would be difficult to get one if I wanted to. I probably could, but I don't have any reason. If I went back and I lived in the States, I'd probably definitely get a gun. I saw this chick, this gal, after a comedy show. She was from Texas, and I asked her if she had any guns, because I think one of the other comedians at the club asked her if she had a gun, and she said she had two Glock 9mm, and she keeps one under her pillow. So yeah, so wow, yeah. So anyways, um, I grew up around him, and then I think I was about 6 or 7. I got we started doing target practice in the basement and all that, and I got a little target practice in with handguns. We weren't firing a shotgun in the basement, but those bullets can ricochet around. So if like you're firing into the cement basement, it can ricochet off of one wall, come back. It can come back and get you. You can get bit by your own bullet. You can shoot yourself if it bounces off a solid object and it comes back at you. So I've had some close ricochets and all that stuff. Then also I used to load my own rounds. So like say a 44 mag or something like that. Like you have the shell, the casing, and then you have the other part. You put that on, whether it's copper or lead, and then you can drill a hole in the middle of it and make it a hollow point. So if you have like 44 mag and you shoot it at a watermelon, it will just blast it to bits. So if you hit somebody with a 44 Magnum, it doesn't matter where you hit them. They're not going to survive that one. Whereas like if you shoot somebody with a 22, you might have to hit them quite a few times to stop them or whatever. A 44 will stop a bear. A 22, if you go through the eye, you can probably kill somebody that way or lodge it in the brain. That happened to a friend of mine and all that. So anyways, there's all this legislation, and it's changing back and forth and all that stuff. And all I can say about is like there's more guns than people, as far as I know, in the United States. And there's a higher, there was never ever, when I was growing up, there was never ever mass shootings. It was like unheard of. It was very, very rare, and now there's hundreds per year, and it's sad and it's horrible. And I never thought that that would ever happen when I was younger. I mean, we had guns around the house. We had, we had guns and stuff, and I never thought that it would turn into this thing where there's mass shootings are getting common in the United States. And I think, like, in Japan where I live now, I don't need a gun, and then I don't carry a gun. And if I went back to the States, I'd probably consider carrying a gun again, packing a gun, depending on the state and the laws and the variables and all that. I'd maybe take that into consideration if I was going to go back and live there. But this mass shooting thing is very unfortunate. Um, I guess I'm crazier than a bat or whatever, or maybe I'm not fully there, but I was taught, or I was trained, not by my parents, but or maybe by my parents, but I was trained about guns from different people at different stages in my life. And I was taught that you never, ever, ever pull out a gun unless you're going to use it. So you keep your gun out of view, out of sight, out of mind, unless you are going to use it. You don't pull it out and start threatening somebody or doing anything like that with it. You never make your gun visible unless you have full intention of using it. And then also I was instructed is when you use it, you don't, you go straight for the head or the chest or whatever. You go for a fatal shot. And the simple reason for that is you don't want the other person to be able to testify against you in court, because once something ends up in a court battle, they can spin it any way they want. There's been people that have been put behind bars that are getting out now, or have been getting out since the DNA test, that they were convicted of being guilty when they actually weren't guilty. They spent time behind bars. So that says something about the legal process, but that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different stuff. So I'm just going to mainly talk about guns and my experience with them, so I learn how to load rounds and make them more powerful, lethal or less lethal, or like for shooting through metal or whatever. And personally, I think that I think, like a car license, like you get a license to drive a car, but you have to prove that you know the laws, the certain speed limits on certain streets. You have to get experience with driving a certain type of car, and you have to get a license and know the laws and regulations. And then also you have to get certified by an instructor, go for a test drive. In your younger years. When you get older, I think you can just take a paper test, or last time I took an eye test. It's kind of funny. There was a guy in there, he was 100 years old, and he was getting his license. But anyways, I think that they should have licenses for guns. Now, with background checks, that's a gray area, because one of the most biggest mass shootings in U.S. recorded history, if you look it up, the guy had a clean record. So he had like a clean psychological profile, and a relatively clean legal record, and then he committed one of the worst mass shootings in history, in U.S. history. I don't know what happened in his brain. He just snapped, and then he did. I guess the guy had money and everything, something just tweaked him out. I mean, maybe it was drugs or something like that. So, but I think generally, just like with the car, is I believe that they should enforce uh, maybe obviously background checks like too if a person has a history of doing, they have a track record, which is like a history of doing a certain type of behavior or violent behavior or something, maybe some discretion should be used whether they should possess a firearm or not, because with a firearm, depending on the type of firearm, like if you have a semi-automatic or an automatic assault weapon, you have the capacity to inflict a mass shooting, or you can cause mass casualties. You can, to be bluntly, you can kill a lot of people really quickly with an assault weapon compared to like your regular six shooter. You have to, unless you have a quick loader, but even if you have a quick loader, you still have it. There's a delay in when you have to reload. Whereas if you have like an AK-47 or some other semi-automatic or fully automatic machine gun, you just slap in another clip and you start popping off rounds, so you can cause a lot more damage a lot quicker. You can cause a lot more casualties on innocent civilians. So the gun is an inanimate object. The gun doesn't kill people. It's the person that pulls the trigger. I mean, eventually they'll probably have AI police, and there'll be robots that will automatically terminate people, or drones or so forth. They have those now. They're using those in warfare, but ultimately, a person is behind the trigger. The gun is just an inanimate object that was laying around the house when I was growing up. And I was later trained that you don't pull it out unless you intend to use it for lethal purposes only, or you're at a gun range and you're using it to, practice your targetry, or you want to go to a gun range. Some of the gun ranges I would go to, I got to try out Glock. I could show my permit, and then I could test a bunch of different guns. Like if I want to get a Glock or whatever type of gun I want to get, I could try out a bunch of different models. I just have to pay a different fee. Because the ammo is expensive. The price of the ammo is expensive for the different types of weapons that you're using. But anyways, so I think that they should tighten down on maybe some background checks, and I think that everybody, I think that they should change the laws. This is my feeling, is that they should have to change the laws to where people have to have some sort of license, because a gun by itself is dangerous. I mean, if like I said, it takes a human to pull the trigger, but I've had guns jam. It's not like the movies where you just keep firing and the gun just like automatically runs, automatically shoots perfectly all the time. I've had bullets jam in the gun that haven't gone off yet. So out of the semi-automatic, the bullet didn't fully eject. It didn't leave the gun, and it didn't go off. So it's clamped halfway in the gun. And so trying to pull the bullet out, in that position, that bullet could potentially go off and shoot me. Other times, I've used guns and then you pull the trigger and it doesn't go off. And then a few seconds later, it goes off. The bullet goes off. So when you pull the trigger, the bullet doesn't automatically fire right away. And there might be a delay, right? So you get through that through experience or through training where they teach you that there's a possibility that also you before you clean your firearm or your weapon. See, this is just basic training that people should have for safety, for their own safety when they're dealing with guns, because they're dangerous. Um, Even if you're not handling that, there's been a lot of accidents where friends have been handing a person an arm, but there's a gun, but there's a bullet in the chamber, and they accidentally shoot their friend, and they're just passing the gun over. But that what's done is done. That's done. And then I've had bullets jam. I've had bullets come out and hit the ground and go off. I've dropped guns and I've had guns fire on the ground. Then I've been shot at. With intent to kill. So that is a long story. Yeah, so I've been shot at a few times, and that wasn't in warfare conditions. It's a whole different thing. But I've been shot at before. I've been on gun ranges that were like way out in the country, and they weren't like official gun ranges, but they're places where they had hunting going on, and they had like sand dunes and places like that where you could shoot your gun at targets. You could do target practice, and it would go into a hill. Like also, if you fire a gun at a target, you want to know what's behind it. Like you don't want to put a target up in your apartment and start doing target practice, because they're going to go through the wall and hit your neighbors, so you got a mess. So anyway, so I think that, the reason for the Second Amendment, particularly in the States, was that they didn't want a militia. They didn't want the government to get overthrown, even though they had a horrible, long, drawn-out civil war. But they didn't want the government to get overthrown or taken over by another government. I think is why they did the Second Amendment thing and all that stuff. And because there's more guns than people in the U.S., no country could successfully invade America on foot. No amount of troops. I mean, too many people have guns. There would be too much guerrilla warfare. It would be too messy. I mean, there's no way. Too many people have guns for a country to come in and invade it. Maybe they're invading it in different ways, through different means, but to do it in that way with guns, they can't invade the country and all that. So I think that people should be allowed to have guns. I just think that they should have tests. They shouldn't just hand anybody a gun unless they've gotten like a license and some training on it for their own safety, and how to use it, how to clean it. Because a few people have passed away or have died that they were cleaning their weapons and they didn't fully check their firearm to make sure that it was cleared, that it was empty, there was no bullet in the chamber, there was no rounds in the clip or anything, and they were cleaning the gun and they shot themselves. They're looking down the barrel of their own gun, checking to make sure they cleaned it well, and they're still around in there, and then, you know, and it happens to go off at the wrong time. That's happened before. So, there should be just a basic familiarity, just like with the car. I think that they should at least do that. At least do that. As far as like the average person, um, I think like for the average person to own a military grade um, type of weapon, an assault weapon is what they would call it. I would think that they would have to have some maybe extra credentials to upgrade to that level of a weapon. So I think that they should have, uh, and it's a different type of animal. It's a different type of weapon that you would be using in that application of a firearm. So they would have to have a special type of training for using assault weapons before they're allowed to possess assault weapon. But back in the day when I was younger, years ago, with just the license I had, I could go buy an AK-47, for $500. I could buy a Chinese AK. I could buy a Kalashnikov, a Russian one, or an aftermarket, or an SKS, or whatever assault weapons. Just no problem. Just a week's waiting list, and I can go pick one up. You know. I think that an upgrade for the class of firearm, it's like if you're gonna go get a bazooka or a 50 caliber, you should probably have training on that type of weapon before you use it and so forth. So it's not the bullet, it's the person behind the trigger that that kills the people or does the mass shooting or whatever. So it's not, the gun is just an inanimate object. So there's all kinds of crazy arguments and all that stuff. Like I'm almost an abortion, so I almost got terminated before I began, and that's a whole nother story. And there's a big arguments about abortions and all that stuff. And I think a gun's pretty straightforward. A gun is just an inanimate object. It depends on how it's employed, how it's used, if it's used for warfare or mass shooting or whatever. As far as what's happened in the States, I don't know what to say. I mean, I didn't grow up in that type of world. I felt a lot safer. We didn't have mass shootings. We would have maybe 7 shootings a month. Well, we had no shootings a month, and then we'd have 1 shooting a month, and then 2 shootings a month. Some of those were like robberies. Some of those were altercations and everything. I don't know what it is now. But, so I guess basically I just got my point across that, I was, grew up around him and I was around him and all that stuff. And, they're just inanimate objects. It depends on how they're used or whatever. So I think people, just like people should have the right to, if they want to drive a car, they should have the right to drive a car, but they should be able to prove that they can drive a car safely. Because I've had people that shouldn't have had a driver's license slam into me a few times, and it wasn't my fault. So, I've had car accidents happen, so probably same thing with guns and all that stuff. I don't know if it's the erasure of the middle class or I don't know why the mass shootings are increasing? I don't know. Is it playing so many video games that people are thinking they're in a video game, but they're in real life and they're using a real gun and they can't distinguish the value of life? I don't know why the mass shootings are increasing so much. It's a problem. Um, um, if you say, well, we're going to restrict these types of weapons or that type of weapons or whatever, if you have somebody that um, is gonna has, I mean, that's something they really want to do. They're going to get a hold of that type of weapon through whatever means they need necessary to do. You know, um, one argument they say is if you take away, all the guns from the good people, then the bad people are just going to be the ones that are going to have weapons, which is true because the bad people are going to still get the weapons. Not that they're bad people, but I mean, they're just people that are on a level where they can get access to them through other means than going through a store. Okay, so, and that's a whole nother story too, but yeah. So, like if you have the average person has a gun, and then a few of these mass shootings recently have been stopped by another person has a gun and they stop the mass shooter. Maybe the mass shooter gets off 3 rounds and then, and then whether school teachers should have them. I mean, it's a big debate on whether school teachers should be trained to, it's just sad what it's become. It just wasn't that way years ago. It wasn't, you know. It's a different country and it's a different world. The whole world now, in my time of being here, has become more unstable. Instability is what I've noticed. Like when I was young, believe it or not, I stayed in Simi Valley. I would smoke a doobie, have a few beers, do some surfing, maybe may or may not have a campfire, and I could pass out on Santa Monica Beach. Yeah, I could pass out on Venice Beach. Then sun come up, I'd go up to Simi Valley. This is years ago when Simi Valley was being developed, and I was working pickup construction doing there in the Simi Valley. And I had a chance to meet George Carlin, my coworker. When I was doing pickup construction, he knew George Carlin and asked me if I wanted to go party with Carlin. And I was kind of nervous in the first. I didn't do it. Now I regret it. I really, really regret it because I didn't know who he was or how famous he was. He's like, "Hey man, I know Carlin. You wanna go party with Carlin and hang out with Carlin?" So, um, yeah. So it's just yeah, it's just sad seeing the whole planet become more unstable, and then the middle class. I've talked to people from several different countries, and it seems like the middle class, like the average working person, doesn't have a chance to really buy a house. It's becoming, the classes are coming between divided, but between more of the haves, the people that have a lot of wealth, and then the people that don't have a lot of wealth. That's unfortunate. And then the medical care in the States, oh, that's a whole nother story. So, yeah, I'm in a different country. So that's it. That's all. Yeah.